Hi there, it's Andrew Burke from Code School Halifax again, and now that we have our page up on the web where we can visit it and we can even see who's visiting, it's important to be able to try to make sure it looks okay on mobile as well, because as we saw in our analytics, about half the people out there are visiting on mobile. And you may have tried looking at your page on your phone and notice it doesn't look very good. Well, that's because we need to do a few things to our page to make sure that it adjusts itself properly for mobile. So a lot of that's CSS, but we're also going to show you a few cool things to do with your browser that will help you figure all this stuff out without having to constantly redeploy all the time. So hang on, here we go. Now here's our page that we've been working on, and you can see it's actually up on the internet at codeschoolhalifax.com/recoveries, and we've got analytics and we can see our traffic and everything. But one thing to note with the traffic is about half the traffic you'll see on most websites these days is coming from mobile devices. And if you've tried looking at this on a mobile device, it looks a little funny. It's not really designed that way. All these numbers, these charts, these are nice to use on a nice big wide screen, but they do not look so good, and they're really cramped and everything on mobile devices. Now, back in the day when mobile first came out, when the iPhone first came out in say 2008-9, when people started using them a lot, sites would often end up with two totally different versions of every page. One for regular widescreen computer viewing, and another for mobile. That became a big headache to maintain because you had to do everything twice. But over the years, what's come up is what's known as a responsive design, which is basically a bunch of things in the CSS that makes the page change its layout in various clever ways based on the size of the window that it's looking at. And now this is a tricky thing to play with if you're actually using your phone, because of course you have to deploy every time and then check it online and or set up some kind of server on your computer, and that becomes a big headache. But browsers turn out to have special built-in tools to handle just exactly this kind of thing. Now I'm going to bring over Chrome here, and you can see I've already got my file opened and it's on my local file system, which is fine. And we can see here it's all basically the same. But if we do our inspect thing, okay, this is all like we've been playing with. There's our console and our little inspector and everything. But you can see here this little item here called Toggle Device Toolbar, which switches it around to show you what it looks like in sort of a mobile device. Okay, so you can see here, and we can make this a little bigger so it's easier to see. This is pretending it's a Pixel 2. Okay, and you can see it's taken everything, and we can sort of slide this down a bit. It's taken everything and it's just shrunk it all down, which isn't very useful for you have to squint real hard to be able to see anything. Here's a Galaxy S5, okay, and a sort of an attempt at what an iPhone 5 would look like. Okay, so this would be really hard to actually use an iPhone X, and iPad, not so bad. You can of course turn it sideways and it's actually pretty useful, but an iPad's almost the same size as a computer screen. So if we go down to our Galaxy 5S, you can see it sideways is not too bad, but up and down it's kind of awkward. And similar things in Safari, you can do similar things, and if you just go to your develop menu and pick responsive design mode, it will let you pick different devices, and if you click twice, it'll flip it over. And if you're looking at it on an iPad, for example, you can actually have it show when it's on split screen, all the different split screen modes it has. You can do that, and it goes landscape and portrait as well. So those are handy, but once again, the iPad is not going to be as big a problem, although it's nice to see what it does look like when shrunk down. Usually I find I like to use one of these like big phones, and then the SE, which is like the smallest that you can usually have these days. And you'll notice the Apple one sort of shrinks and grows it. Apple has a slightly different way of managing things, but you can see here still the table blows way out, and it's difficult to do. It's difficult to see this right. But the one here you can sort of see on the Galaxy, it's really, really hard to see. So this is what we need to kind of fix. And there's a few steps right up front that make this a little bit easier. And the first is a special thing you can put in your header and back into your file. So we're mostly not going to be doing anything with JavaScript, so we'll climb that out of the way. Something you can put in your head section. And it's just some magic words that force it to show everything properly at a zoomed scale that fits with your device width, okay? And that is something called meta name. And just like so much other stuff that's in the head, just type the magic words in, and you don't have to actually understand how they all necessarily work. There's all sorts of weird designed by committee stuff in here, but that's okay. It's setting up a device width. It's going to have the width of the device. Initial scale equals 1.0. Okay, there's your tag. It's some kind of viewport tag. And let's take a look at this in Chrome. Okay, now it's grown it. Things are sort of, it's assuming that it's going to try to fill the available space, and it understands the width that's available, and it won't try to shrink it all the way down to fit everything in the way that it was before, which is great here. But when you get to our table, it gets really awkward because, once again, we don't have enough space to fit it, and it just all gets awkward. But at least now you can see how everything fits together. And then one thing you'll notice, it is a little flaky when it tries to do these changes. So reload regularly and you'll get a better experience often, especially if you switch between devices on the fly. Sometimes you need to reload for it to kick in. So anyway, just so you know, and if we take a look on our Safari side, that's the one from away. Here we go back to this one and develop responsive design mode. Okay, there we go. This is a little nicer. Still kind of a little awkward, but once again, just like the other ones, you can see, we blow out our width. Okay, so here's what we want to do now is try a bunch of design changes while having all these windows set up available. This is why developers often end up with big multi-screen setups or lots of big screens, because you end up with lots of different windows here and there, where you want to try to be able to look at things side by side and see how they work. Okay, so let's just bring these together here and maybe open up another window here and just open our index again, regular size, so we can see how it looks here and how it looks on these mobile devices. Okay, so whoops. And one other way, if you're sort of in a pinch, you can sort of shrink your window, but it only goes down so far. But that sometimes helps sometimes too. So there we go. So we're ready to start rolling on this. We have a regular screen and we have two versions of the small screen. Okay, and here's where we can start doing things. So the magic with getting things to work responsively is what are called media queries in CSS. Let's slide this over here. And basically they're sort of like a wrapper around regular tags, regular CSS stuff. So you got your box section, squiggly brackets, and a bunch of things inside that. Well, you can sort of make a big wrapper that kicks in only on certain criteria. So media was originally designed for whether you're doing a screen or whether you're going to print it out on paper. You can have alternate CSS. But one of the big ones that's often used now is max width and min width, okay, which is up to this width, use the CSS instead. And usually most mobile devices sort of max out at around 400 pixels, technically. Okay, you can see here it's 414, but down here it's 320. So maybe let's make this 440. Okay, and just to make sure that this works, sometimes I like to do this really kind of blatantly, make it something quite large, and then make everything inside. You just set up your CSS tags just like up here. And what it'll do here is anything in here will kind of override whatever's been set normally, only if it's within this width. So I can say color red. Oops. Okay, so we'll show you what this looks like in our regular browser mode. Okay, so if we shrink this, when it gets to a certain point, see we've got to 600, everything turned red. Okay, when we get back above 600, it turns green again. Okay, that's because this max width thing has kicked in. Okay, now changing the color is sort of pointless, is silly, but we can do all sorts of other things with CSS. And if we look at it here, you'll see everything's red now. In our Chrome as well, which is back here, it's all red, but this is green. Okay, so you can see these get kicked in. So this is a nice, easy way to visualize how these things fit together, but we're not going to be changing the colors. Okay, that's good and not a great thing. But one thing we can do is shrink the font size just a little bit, so that when it's large, we have nice big fonts that make it easy to read, but when it's smaller, everything's a little bit smaller, so you can fit more on the screen. Okay, so let's see how that works. Okay, that's normal, and we shrink it down. Everything shrinks down, so you can fit more. You see, when it gets smaller, it shrinks things down. Okay, not a huge change, but it's enough to make a difference. And see, suddenly everything's kind of fitting nicer here. Okay, when you get down to SE, you're still blowing out the width, but much less. But on the phone 8 Plus, it actually all fits. Okay, so this is nice. And let's go to Chrome as well. Okay, still a little bit tight, but not too bad. We go to our Pixel 2 XL, and it almost all fits. It's got a little bit of back and forth, but not bad. Okay, so we're making good progress here already just by adjusting the font size. Okay, one other thing that's handy, you'll notice there's still a lot of margin around these boxes, right, on the page. And when you're on mobile, you don't need the big margins. Are kind of nice on a regular window because it helps some spacing and things. But in this case, you maybe want to, get rid of these margins because they're taking up a lot of extra space. And here it's not that big a deal, but here it's quite a lot of the width. So we can go and basically take our thing and take our boxed section, right? Because that's the container that everything's in, or the rounded rectangles. And up here, you can see boxed section has padding of 10, margin of 10. So why don't we make this a padding of 5 pixels and a margin of 3 pixels, okay? And once again, up here, we don't see any changes, but down here, okay, it's a bit wider. Now, I've noticed a few times here today, for whatever reason, while I'm testing, it seems to be timing out from the data feed, which is one of those annoying things that sometimes happens. There it goes. But anyway, so you can see here, everything's fitting already a lot nicer. Just we've shrunk things a little bit, and it's already kind of fitting better. Okay, we can even make these the padding 3 pixels as well. Okay, things fitting a bit tighter. Okay, so that's already getting a bit better. But the real action is down here in the table. And we can do that with TD and TH, just like we had up here. And you can see our TD and TH padding 5 pixels. Let's make these really small padding because we really want this to be, so a little bit of padding so they're not right on top of each other. But let's see what that does. Okay, now it almost fits. It's a little busy, but it actually fits onto our iPhone 5. So I find if you can get it to fit on your worst case scenario, that's great. And your iPhone 8, much better. Still kind of hard to see. So maybe let's take this padding and also make the font size a little smaller. Okay, now this is a little harder to read, but once again, we're kind of shrunk this down. It's a bit easier when you're actually working on the mobile device because it's a bit bigger. But you can get a sense that it's actually showing stuff. So we can add the padding up a little bit. And this is one of these things where you just sort of go back and forth and try it on different things and see how it works out. So there you go. A little bit of padding can go a long way. Okay, so here, this is not changed at all. Still is good, but you can see when you shrink it down, it switches. Okay, but here you can see this is beginning to look a lot better and more manageable. Okay, it doesn't blow out the margins. The biggest problem in all these is blowing out the margins. Now, one thing I noticed let's just check on our Chrome and see how this works. Once again, there we go. Still a little bit tight. Once again, the margins, you might not necessarily see this on a real mobile device. These simulators are sort of pretty good, but not great sometimes. But you get the idea of it. Sometimes they set up their own margins and things. So we can maybe change the margins a little bit. 4 pixels instead of 10, it's still nice. Anyway, it's not often these have different rules about how they wrap as well and things like that. But one thing I do notice is that now when we're looking at this in mobile, it's good to sort of get a sense of some of the things that you might want to fix anyhow. So one of the things is this top bit is hard to read. It's kind of flushed out by this picture, which is a bit dominating now because it's less so on here because we've shrunk the font. I think this header should be in one of these boxes like the rest of this content. So I'm going to go back over to our HTML. I'm going to wrap up this title bit and we're going to put it in a special tag called header, which is not to be confused with head. It can be a little confusing sometimes. Okay, and let's format selection. Okay. And let's take this out of here and put it down in the footer because it's more informational. It shouldn't be necessarily right at the top. Okay, so now we've got our header, but we haven't done anything with it, but we can give it a class of boxed section. Header is one of those tags. It's a bit like div, but it doesn't mean anything. So it has a meaning, but it doesn't have any innate styling attached to it, so we can add our own classes to it and see how that works. So let's see what that looks like. Okay, that gives you a nicer box, gets everything kind of more cleanly together, which is good. This looks a little not evenly balanced. That's because of our scroll bars over here, which you wouldn't have, of course, on a phone. But you can see this makes it a little nicer to see. Okay. And one other thing, I might change the font size changes so that it's only applicable to the by country list, not the everything, because this is actually not too bad. So let's go to here. And as you remember, a comma lets you say specify for multiple things, and then if you have a space, it's a thing within a thing. Okay, so now these are a bit bigger. These are fine like they are. Okay. And a few other little things, actually, we're going to work on here. While we're here, just want to do a few more cleanups because I think we're getting close to stuff, and I think it would be good to have a few other small updates just to make the page a little nicer. Okay, so we can do things like, well, for one thing, the growth percentage makes the header blow up. We don't need to say percentage because it says percentage all the way down there. Okay, so we can go up here. Now this is in our JavaScript, of course, where we write this up. So we are going to make a few small changes. So growth percentage, just say growth. Okay, that makes the table a lot nicer. Okay, here, these are all kind of bold because we set up here that everything in that top section should be bold. And that's not necessarily what we really want to have. Global count bold, because the TH already has bold, which means now if we change this now, we'll have our contents lighter than our bold. Okay, that's a little nicer to work with. Okay, there you can see all of our numbers. And one other thing is we have share of total cases here and growth rate here, but we have growth and share in the opposite positions on the bottom. So I think I'd like to rearrange this slightly, but what's nice is because it's all in JavaScript and it's in a loop, we just have to change the header once, just move the position of these, and then just take this line and move it out of the way and put it above. And whoops. There we go. So now we've swapped places. So we've got share and growth. Okay? Share total cases, growth rate. And we can, of course, change the wording on this to make it a little nicer if you feel like it. But you can see there, we've got a nicer, more consistent way of showing these things. And that's kind of nice. And then down here, just one last thing to find out more information. This is sort of overwhelming this footer bit. So if we do this, we can change our footer, or we can even make this content at the bottom a tagline like we had elsewhere. So P class equals tagline. So now it's italics, so it's a little easier to work with. Okay, and here we go on our regular. It looks pretty good. And we've got our tagline at the bottom. And we've got this here, and it looks pretty good. And we can try it on different phones right side by side here. And let's also take this from 600 down to 450, because that's really where the things start to fall apart. So when you're on an iPad mini, you're still okay. But you can see here what it works like in different things, and you can try different widths and see how they come together. Okay, so that's a quick tour, and then we can put this all into our Git, of course, and add them there. Responsive layout, and then we can publish it online, and then we can actually look at it on our real phone properly and see how it works, because you can never really guess completely with these little helpers because they don't provide all the details you need. They sort of give you a good sense roughly, but once you get it onto a real phone, you can really get a sense of it and fine-tune that. Okay, so once again, these are all design issues which can become a sort of a set of personal preferences and what you feel works, and you got to just eyeball it and sort of decide, do you want to make these fonts smaller, do you make them bigger, maybe you want to make them maybe not too much smaller so that they show up a bit better. Once again, it's all a sort of subtle personal sense of preferences. So you got to figure that out yourself. But you can see here we're making some progress, making things look good, look better responsively than they would on without any of these changes. Okay, so if you want to always look back, you can go to Code School Halifax recoveries, and hit our responsive design mode, and you can see how weird it looks here versus what we've got here. Okay, even though they're both the iPhone SE, this is next to useless because you have to swap sideways, and here we've got everything all in a row. Okay, so once again, everyone's going to have different stuff, and even in fact, I think one thing, we're going to change our border radius for a boxed section, because border radius here is 20 pixels. That's way too big. So in this case, 5 pixels. Okay, because we're smaller, we need a smaller corner, maybe 10. Okay, that's a little nicer. It doesn't butt into things quite so much. Okay, so you get the idea of all the different things that can happen in here. So there we go. Now we got ourselves something mobile and something that still works locally as well. It still works on a regular screen as well without having to make multiple versions of each page. And that's always useful. So there's our introduction to responsive design. Now, this is pretty well the end of the main focus of this. What I might do is every so often come out with another one. There's always other ideas I have on things we can do to sort of adjust this. And I might do some other things with other technologies here and there. But thank you so much for being on this voyage with me all this way for the last, I didn't expect this to be 18 whole separate lessons. So it's been kind of fun to do. And it's been definitely fun for me to be able to work on something during this whole crazy situation. And especially something that lets me see how many people have recovered. So you can see how well some places are doing and how things are growing, which is good. How people are getting over this whole messy situation. And so it's a bit of good news as well as some bad news. So hope you enjoyed that, and I'd love to see what you folks come up with. If you get stuff up there, feel free to send me an email at info@codeschoolhalifax.com. And at some point, we will be doing some more actual classes, which cover a lot of the same material, but much more in depth. And we'll do things like Flexbox and everything. And of course, ideally, it'll be in person. So I'll have me there and I can actually show you what's what if you're having trouble with, your tags and quotation marks and stuff. And we cover a lot more detail in the actual classes. And of course, if you really, really want to get dug in on this, I've worked, Code School Halifax is in partnership with Lighthouse Labs, which is a bootcamp place out of Toronto and Vancouver and Montreal. And they've all gone completely virtual now. So you can do a virtual bootcamp remotely. And ideally, that will become a physical in-presence bootcamp at some point when all this stuff settles down. But you don't have to necessarily be in Toronto anymore to get the bootcamp experience. Now, that is an 8 to 10 week epic, full-time job of learning how to code, but you can come from a standing start all the way up to a hireable junior dev, which is kind of fun. If you wanted to get really dug in while you're home isolating, you can do it. But also, if you're out and about later on when things settle down, it's also a nice thing to maybe be able to try and do if you're around that area. We're hoping to maybe do something like that vaguely here in Halifax. We're waiting for the market to figure that out, but for now, we're going to be doing these part-time courses. But you can find out all the information about that at codeschoolhalifax.com. And I'll keep that page updated. And once again, I'd love to hear from you and let me know what you think. And all the best. Take care.